Thank you very much. Once again, Larissa, appreciate it. So let's just jump right into it. So my job here is to talk about people, process, and technology. So let's just jump into the next slide. So before I do that, let me just recap. I know we just saw a second ago kind of what maybe some of the reasons for the strategy gap are. I think there's two reasons for the strategy gap. The first one is really obvious, and we just talked about it. And the second one is actually not very obvious, but a major root problem. So the first one is just that focus on short-term profits. So, we start off, we budget, we focus on short-term metrics, net income, key ratios, maybe an ROI if you want to get fancy and include something more than just the P&L. And then we also recognize we need to do a little LRP, right? We need to do a little long-range planning. But what we really do is we use the LRP really for the target setting process of the next year's budget. And that's all it becomes, right? And that's the big flaw. What we need to do is take that further and use the LRP really to drive shareholder value added. So that becomes the target. It's not a line item exercise at that point, right? It's not saying, well, you know what, revenue has to be X in 5 years. It's what value are we creating, and that's what we need to tie to. And then ultimately the executive compensation has to link to that. Now, the kind of less likely or less noticeable one is kind of the allocation of resources. So when we fight over allocation for resources, we actually create hockey stick growths within the company. Everyone fighting over that potential resources, which creates those hockey sticks. And really every year it's kind of just a new hockey stick that just kind of keeps getting created. And we actually create very little value in doing that. What we need to do is get away from fighting over resources and recognize that every plan for every strategic business unit really follows a life cycle curve. You initially seed that investment. At some point, obviously, you see if you hit product market fit, that moves up into a growth stage. At that point, you're evaluating your growth stage opportunities and funding those accordingly, but you're only throwing resources centrally into those growth stage funds. And then eventually the strategic business unit hits more of a plateau where it's generating a lot of cash flow and feeding back into the business, and then ultimately decline. I think the life cycle curve is the way to get away from, fighting over those resources and that hockey stick growth. I just asked you to go back and think about your projections year after year and how often you see hockey stick growths that do not materialize. And the only way we can get around that is to move to more of a life cycle approach. So those are the two reasons I see. So if we can jump to the next slide here. Again, my point here today is to really talk about people, process, and technology. And we want to redefine it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just change the name a little bit. So rather than calling it people, process, and technology, I want to change that word technology into platforms. We've evolved tremendously on technology, right? So this people, process, technology, FP&A has been using that for years to kind of explain what we do and kind of the realm we operate in. I've certainly used it many times. So taking away that word technology and actually adding the word platform, I think is going to help us a lot. Obviously, it also makes them all P's, which is nice, but technology is now platform. We're also inserting one additional element, and that's purpose. So purpose, people, process, and platform. So let's just kind of review this. In the old kind of traditional FP&A world, right, the purpose was performance management, right? I still big believer in performance management, but what we did in performance management is we keyed in on certain metrics, right? So we identified which metrics looked really good and we talked about those, we told a story around those, and the ones that weren't great, we just sort of de-emphasized those, right? What we need to do in kind of modern FP&A is we need to move to more of a cash flow based analytic, right? So what we're really doing is we're identifying where the performance bottlenecks are within the organization. So we're looking at sources of cash, uses of cash, and showing how that flows through the business. Now, when I say cash flow, I'm not talking cash, right? Cash is one line on the balance sheet. Cash flow is that cycle. It's how the money moves through the business. It's analyzing that whole thing. A lot of times people think, oh, cash is king. You're just talking about cash. No, we're talking about how the cash moves through the business. We identify the bottlenecks that way. On the people side, the old traditional road was, workflow approvals. So I'm going to go ahead in my silo, I'm going to plan, I'm going to forecast, and then I'm going to, submit that up for an exception or rejection by the next person. But we need to get more collaborative. We need to focus on sort of discussion and debate of alternatives rather than just sort of promote or accept. Promote or accept was the old way to get to single version of the truth. What we need to now do is bring people into the conversation and do more discussion and debate. On the process side, I talked about this a little bit, but I'm a huge fan of this. The old process was very arbitrary timeframes, right? We're looking at a 1-year AOP. Maybe some people are doing well, they're being sophisticated, they're doing an 18-month rolling forecast or a 12-month rolling forecast, or we're doing a 5-year LRP. Why are we picking those arbitrary time periods? It's not helping us out. We end up hitting reset every time we redo that process. What we need to do is move more to a continuous life cycle approach, right? Where you take a strategic business unit, right? That's the vehicle that goes through the life cycle. So we're identifying, we're starting with the problem. What is the problem we want to solve? How much is it going to cost to solve that? And then quantify, did we actually hit that, product market fit? Are we moving into a growth stage, maturity, and then inevitable decline? Today, we do not structure our business in those SBUs. We structure them maybe by segment or whatever, and we're actually really losing an opportunity for us to really hone in on strategy by thinking about the life cycle. The life cycle is a bet, right? It's a gamble. You're going to say, here's where I think I am today. But what you need to do is constantly review that and constantly assess, are we still in that stage? Have we moved forward? How much longer do we have till we get to the next stage? Those are the critical conversations, and it always sets it up in a more of a DCF type format, which is great for valuation. The last one is the platform. So we went away from technology, moved to platform. So in the old world, right, it was a myriad of tools. We talked about PowerPoint and Excel and Word and whatever else it may be. We also did a very bad job of kind of poorly defining our business areas. So, how do we structure our business for planning? And then, in many cases, just in planning in general, we focus more on bottom up than anything else. As we move to this more connected platform, right, we need to shift to a more always on process. So not just once, 3 weeks a year are we doing a strategic plan, not just, a couple months of the year are we in budgeting season. We need to always be refreshing and always evaluating and always looking for opportunities. And that needs to be more of a continuous process. It doesn't need to be a more, laborious process. If we can streamline it, we can get less people involved and we can maintain it going forward. But we need to be constantly looking at that. We need to be integrating strategic, financial, and tactical. Now, I'd love to be able to kind of go into all these in more detail. But why don't we just jump to the next slide, and I'll just go through the platform one real quick. And actually, this is a bit of eye candy here. But here's how I look at connected platforms, right? So we have those 3 unified rings, right? We have the strategic planning. That's very much modeling based, right? We're going to be looking at kind of continuous screening of opportunities, right? Looking for things, whether that be a black swan or just opportunities. We're constantly screening, right? Doesn't mean we're active, we're just screening. Ultimately, we're going to limit that down, start to set some targets and push that down through the business. That's going to be where we connect into the financial planning, where we actually want to then drive down that strategic plan into our budgeting process, driving that down to a lower level where we can actually do our financial planning, and then we can reforecast from there as we go around. And finally, pushing it down to the last ring, which is more of the tactical, or what some people will say strategic execution, right? That tactical layer is really initiative based. So it's what are the initiatives that we're looking at to drive the business forward. So that can be a strategic initiative, right? So we can be very strategical in the way we think about that. But these can be any sort of initiative, right? They can be marketing initiatives. They can be sales pipeline. They can be tech projects that we're working on. We need to get down to that initiative level where we can really kind of drive accountability and execute.